Alright, so this is a Sorelle Porta crib, they call it. It is from a U.S. company. I'm not quite sure if it's U.S. made, but it's pretty decent quality. It has drawers and shelves, and we'll show more detail on that throughout the video. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments below. You may get bored watching the entire video. If you want to skip ahead or ask a question, myself or somebody else will answer to tell you what part of the video to skip ahead to deal with any particular questions you might have. The unpacking on this I'm going to deal with in another segment here. It is kind of important to have the unpacking happen where the baby is not going to be, and or at least not for a little while. And then the assembly probably ought to be in a room where it's going to end up going, but it's a solid enough piece that it's not absolutely necessary. You could assemble this, let's say, in the downstairs or something like this, carry it up, but it's a little chunky for getting through doorways. So expect this thing to have issues with some doorways, and that's where optimally you want to assemble it in the room where it will go. It's made out of mostly real wood, a little bit of cardboard on the panels, but they're reasonably well secured. Cost on this I'm not quite sure, but the company is called Sorelle out of New Jersey. I think they were calling this the Porta crib. It might be sold by a few different companies under a few different names. So if you have one that looks like this, this will be a helpful instructional video to supplement your instructions. Okay, so with this being a larger, heavier box, we're unpacking this in the garage, carrying the pieces into the room where it's going to be. Like the IKEA furniture, a lot of mail-order boxed up furniture, flat pack sometimes we call it, we want to set this stuff up in a room where it's going to be. And that means sometimes you don't want to hike the whole thing with all the boxes through the house because there's other stuff in the room that's going to reduce your workspace. So in this circumstance, I'm doing the unboxing in a garage. We'll carry the pieces in, and we try not to carry in the garbage, so you make a judgment call on that. But this is how the crib looks packed, and we'll just we're going to lay some of this foam on the side. It's usually pretty easy to tell the parts from the packing, unlike the IKEA furniture and the Newport Mini Porta crib. Perhaps not as portable as we'd like these all to be, but could this survive being assembled in one room, carried to another? Probably, but when somebody's paying for it, we still want to go with the traditional of assembling it in a room where it's going to be. Okay, so once we're unpacked, we realize the box is going to be almost as full of the packing material as it was of the material. Pretty well packed to protect the contents against damage. Something to understand, and another good reason, because this is a baby crib, to unpack this in a room separately from where it's going to go, is this stuff. Okay, this is some of the packing foam material. We don't want that stuff getting all over the place. It tends to want to come apart, and it could pretty easily be mistaken for candy by a small child. It's edible, but probably not at all healthy to eat. So that's another reason to unpack this in a separate room and get all these little pieces back in the box right away and close that box back up. Now, I know a lot of people like to separate everything out for recycling purposes, but cleanliness and safety from my standpoint is what I'm going to do with my job, and so that's what I'm going to recommend. Okay, first thing to go together on this is the drawers. There's a few things that they did with pre-assembling this at the factory that are really going to help out with that. One is they put the drawer rails on everything, because that's one of the big complaints of the IKEA furniture with people that are new or infrequently dealing with assembling furniture, is the drawer rails can go on wrong. And everything can look right, you put them on wrong, and of course the stuff isn't going to go together. And a lot of times what they're going to do is they'll design it so that the holes go in different places, and if the holes don't line up, then it's wrong. You keep setting pieces on there until the holes do line up, and then you're probably right. On these, it's already done for you, so you don't have to worry about that. And that's one of the reasons I would classify this as, medium to easy as far as an assembly job goes. So they come already on here. One of the things that you can get wrong on this when you're assembling a drawer is that you could get those pieces reversed. So here's your clue. Here's where watching the video is going to benefit you in addition to using the instructions that come with this. So wheels always go to the front and down on that type of a drawer rail. On the furniture side, on the box side, it's always front and down. On the drawer, and you'll notice it's kind of an L bracket attachment system, the wheel always goes up and to the rear. The other thing you're going to see is little curved and sloped parts on a rail, Those are the automatic drawer closure, a low budget, gravity operated automatic door closing mechanism. The other thing to look out for though is it is possible to get the sides on this backwards. The other thing that's possible to get wrong is gaps. We kind of want this to be done without a gap. It probably isn't going to matter that much once everything's fully together, but you may have to physically hold this together as that's getting screwed in. A little easier said than done when you're wrestling with a piece. And this is where if you've got a couple working together, it can work better to have this as a two-person job. Somebody just kind of holds it steady while the other person puts the screws in. Over here, now there are pre-drilled holes in the edges of these things, but you may or may not see those line up when the screws are going in, because the screws are kind of a sharp, they're a sharp wood screw. So whether it's going in that hole correctly or not, you may not know. One of the things you want to make sure to do when you're doing this is to make sure there's a little bit of a gap here, that it overlaps a little bit. If you don't overlap it, this is going to happen. You'll get a little splintered section. Now that's not the end of the world. It's in the back of a drawer, but we want to avoid that happening. The way you're going to avoid that happening is you've got to have that little bit of a gap on putting that together, or else the holes won't line up and you'll splinter the wood. Now I was using a low powered screwdriver on this. If you're using like an 18 or 20 volt screwdriver, then you may not know. If you're using a hand screwdriver, it depends on how much downward pressure you're putting on these things, that it may create problems. So I kind of suggest using a low power electric type screwdriver on this stage of the assembly. We start getting into these things where I'm just going to be using a regular ratcheting wrench. Now, they talk about these things being 12 millimeter. I don't know about that kind of stuff, but a 532 appears to be working on that hex head, but they're usually metric, and my experience has been it's usually 4 millimeter metric, even though this isn't marked. So on to the next stage, but right now we're going to be getting all these drawers together. The box comes next. Okay, so I'm putting the cabinet box together. The most difficult part is going to be the part that holds the drawers. These pieces all have to be assembled on one side before the other side goes in. And then when you are putting it together for the final assembly, you've got to make sure that all these other parts line up and go into the slots where they're supposed to go before the rest of it happens. One of the things that I'm finding pretty difficult, a lot of it has to do with this stuff's all wiggly and flexible, and if it flexes out of the spots, then it's not going to go in. In addition to that, if these are all loose, it won't go in. If they're all tight and they're off by just a little bit, then the pegs aren't going to all line up simultaneously. 8 or 9 pegs have to line up simultaneously in addition to the slots in order to get the other pieces on. So it's also another opportunity to kind of back off, see if there's other hardware to install, and check on that. There's a few screws that would go up from underneath here, but the way I was reading the instructions, they don't really go in until after the box is together. They want it to stay a little flexible as it's going together. But this is how they say to do it. You got to put one side together before the other side goes on. It's tricky, I'm not going to lie to you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrestle with the other side of it. And basically what all of this is going to use is these little barrel lock fasteners. Let's see if we can pull one out here. They come kind of pre-assembled so you know where your pairs are. there's a little X slot on there, and you'll notice that part of it goes all the way through and the other part of it's short. Now, there's no reason to put a screwdriver in there except to line it up. And those get lined up in these holes. Now, some of them are going to be close to the surface of the hole. Others are deep down in there. And that's one of the reasons this either has to be sideways or upside down when you're working on it. But pretty much sideways. And this is where things are going to get tricky on this piece. Okay, so here it's starting to go together and actually look like something, right? What's happening is there's a big piece and a little piece as far as our cribbing part goes. And we have a, it's really tricky because this is a part you really can't do upside down. So the hardest bolt to do on this is the upper one. And then that's going to hold everything else in. Now, there's these rails which come separately. They're going to take dowels. I'm going to put a dowel in each one of these things. And they set up like that. So you'll see dowel holes in the side here. Kind of hard to see in that lack of light, but that's what goes on here. Now there's a sequence that they've set up for this. And the sequence is that we do the back, then we do the side, and we're going to work our way around to the front. Now I put the front on with just that upper screw dowel in because that one's so hard to deal with. I wanted to get it out of the way. I didn't crank it down tight because we still have the base to put in, the little mattress support. That's going to go in before this gets tightened down. So we may even be taking that back off to get the mattress support on, depending on how this goes. But the next stage is going to be putting the next side on. And again, the hardest aspect of this is getting that little screw base in up underneath. Alright, so with the crib base going in, working the way around as I discussed earlier, the mattress base has these little wing arms on it. Hopefully you can see those maybe in a little better light here. Let's move this over here. So the mattress base has these little wing arms on it, which is part of how these are probably standardized across a few different manufacturers. Well, this may not be, so they compensate for that with these little wing arms. Now, what height you set this at, see there's like a medium, a low, and a high, is going to determine, you know, the size of the child, what personal preference is, and it can be adjusted later on. Also, the thickness of the mattress that you might be using. Now, this comes with a couple of foam pads. The owners are telling me that they're not going to be using those. They're going to use a thicker mattress, something a little more deluxe. It's entirely, you know, personal preference on that sort of a thing. The other thing is, this is set up where it can go in the middle of a room with the shelves in the back, or you may not use those. And so if it goes in the edge of a room, of course, those aren't really going to be part of the equation. There's a little bit of touch-up I'm going to be doing here, not much. There's also some hardware available to attach this to a wall. For the most part, people don't want to do that. It just that some building and insurance codes require furniture to be attached to the walls if it's going to be up against a wall. I find it kind of rare, but that's one of the reasons why these little strap kits are included in a lot of furniture that's out there these days. And there we are, all done. There is one additional thing that was going on here, which was the little baby changing strap. I call it the go and answer the phone strap. If you changing a baby's diapers or something, you got to go answer the phone really quick. You don't want them standing up, jumping off this thing, so that you put the little seatbelt strap on there. That's separate from the one that was for holding it up against the wall. But again, the end users on this, I think, are going to use different mattresses, so we're not setting those on there at this point. And the baby's still not on the way yet. So one of the things we may end up doing is lowering the mattress one notch. We'll see how that goes. The thing is that generally speaking, the newer the baby is, the higher you're going to have the mattress. As the baby gets a little bigger, you'll lower it. We set it on the middle one. We're kind of okay in the halfway point. The drawers are all in, and that's it. It's kind of a nice item. Pricing I'm not really sure of. So next I'll film the beginning of the video.